Today, we're going to talk about a story that plays out every single day along the US-Mexico border. It's a story about work, about money, and about power. And it's all wrapped up in two very, very different paychecks for basically the same job. All right, let's just get right into the numbers, because they tell the whole story. In Mexico, the minimum wage for a full day's work is about $22. Now, hop across the border, and the U.S. federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. And if you're in a state like California, it's $16 an hour. Think about that. A worker in California makes in just over an hour what a worker in Mexico makes all day. So you gotta ask yourself, how is that even possible? We live in this age of so-called free trade, with deals that are supposed to make everything fair. So why is there still this giant, gaping hole between two paychecks? Well, that's what we're going to figure out.
To get to the bottom of this, the first piece of the puzzle, believe it or not, isn't on the border. It's actually inside the United States. You see, when it comes to labor law in the U.S., it's not one set of rules. It's more like a complicated patchwork quilt.
Here's how it works. The federal government in Washington, D.C. sets the absolute minimum, the floor. These are the basic rights that every single worker in the country gets. But, and this is the important part, each state can then decide to build on top of that floor. They can add way more protections if they want to.
So this federal floor is built on a few really big pillars. You've got the Fair Labor Standards Act, the FLSA, which sets that national minimum wage and overtime. Then there's the NLRA, which protects your right to form a union. You've got OSHA, making sure your workplace is safe, and the FMLA, which guarantees you can take unpaid leave for family or medical reasons. That's the baseline, coast to coast.
And here is where you see just how different a worker's life can be. Let's take maternity leave. In Mexico, it's 12 weeks, and it's paid. The U.S. federal law? 12 weeks, yeah, but it's unpaid. But then a state like California comes in and offers at least partial pay. Or get this, the informal labor rate. In Mexico, a shocking 55% of the workforce is informal. That means more than half of all workers have no contract, no social security, nothing. In the U.S., it's under 10%. So your reality completely changes depending on which side of which line you happen to be standing on.
Okay, so that's the law inside the countries. Now let's zoom out and see how this all gets supercharged at the international level. We have to talk about the huge trade deal that runs North America. You might know it as the USMCA or the T-MEC down in Mexico.
And to really get what's going on, you have to understand this one key concept: labor dumping. It's a bit of a harsh term, but here's what it means. It's when a country's main selling point is that its workers are paid very little and don't have many rights. They can make things so cheaply that nobody else can compete, not because they're smarter or more innovative, but because their labor costs are just rock bottom.
Now, this imbalance sets off a massive domino effect. You have heavily subsidized U.S. corn flooding the Mexican market, selling for prices that local Mexican farmers just can't touch. So what happens? Those farmers lose their land. They have no work, they get pushed into that unregulated informal economy we talked about, or they migrate. And all of this feeds a growing cross-border black market for everything from goods to labor, which doesn't really help either economy in the long run.
And we've already seen how this played out in the first few years of the New Deal. The U.S. did start doing more labor inspections in Mexico. That was a big promise. But at the same time, that flood of cheap U.S. crops kept coming. And yeah, Mexico raised its minimum wage, but inflation just ate it all away. So poverty actually went up. The fundamental problem didn't go anywhere.
Okay, this is where we have to pull the camera back one more time, to the highest possible level. Because this whole thing, it's not just about the U.S. and Mexico anymore. This is about North America's spot in a global chess match.
And in this new global game, there's a new term for Mexico's role: a strategic buffer zone. What on earth does that mean? It means the U.S. is increasingly looking at Mexico as a critical manufacturing hub and as an economic shock absorber, all designed to protect its own supply chains and to push back against its main global competitor, China.
And look, don't just take my word for it. The OECD, a major international economic organization, puts it in these really clear terms. They call it a dependent vertical integration. Basically, Mexico has become a vital gear in the giant U.S. economic machine. But the price it pays for that role is its own freedom to build its own industries.
To see just how unique this is, just look south. Compare the T-MEC bloc in North America to South America's bloc, Mercosur.
The T-MEC is vertical. Mexico makes parts that go straight up into the U.S. supply chain. But Mercosur is horizontal. Countries like Brazil and Argentina mostly trade finished goods with each other. They don't have those deep, integrated production lines. They're still stuck mostly selling raw materials to the rest of the world.
So why is all this happening? Why this strategy? Well, this chart right here tells you everything you need to know. It projects global economic influence. In 2020, the U.S. is just ahead of China. But look at the projection for 2025. China is expected to surge past the U.S. And by 2030, the gap gets even wider. This forecast is the driver behind the whole buffer zone strategy. It's America's big strategic response to this massive shift in global power.
So that's the grand strategy, the 30,000-foot view. But these big global moves have very real consequences for people on the ground. So let's bring it all back down and look at who's winning, who's losing, and what kinds of strange new opportunities are popping up.
That first trade deal, NAFTA, came at a heavy price for a lot of American workers. 682,000. That's the estimated number of U.S. jobs, mostly in manufacturing, that disappeared as companies packed up and moved to Mexico to take advantage of those lower wages we talked about at the beginning.
And with the New Deal, it's not like the pain is just on one side. These are the estimated hits to different sectors. The U.S. auto and textile industries are projected to lose hundreds of millions. But look at the hit to Mexican agriculture, a staggering $26 billion. A direct result of that subsidized competition from the north.
But here's where the story takes a fascinating turn. All of this chaos, this tangled web of rules and global politics, it's creating a whole bunch of brand new problems. And wherever you have new problems, you have new opportunities for people who are smart enough to solve them.
So a whole new industry of problem solvers is emerging. You've got entrepreneurs using AI to build tools that help companies figure out the thousands of pages of T-MEC regulations. You've got specialized lawyers and consultants who are suddenly in huge demand. There are digital logistics experts designing smarter supply chains and financial advisors helping small businesses navigate the maze. The lesson? Complexity creates a market for clarity.
And all of this brings us back to the biggest question of all. When you look at the wage gap, the trade rules, and the giant geopolitical game being played, you have to ask, in this new struggle for the 21st century, is Mexico a true partner or is it a pawn?
And the answer to that question isn't just some political talking point. It's going to decide what kind of jobs are available, how much we all get paid, and what our economic future looks like, not just in Mexico, but in the US and Canada too. It's going to define the next chapter for an entire continent.